Sounds good.
I'm ready anytime you are. Okay.
Mike, I just want to give you the heads up that Paul Whitley's not going to be here tonight.
Can I ask a question of just the parliamentary thing before the meeting starts? When I was looking at the notes, it says that I adjourned the meeting. Is that worth saying that I didn't, and so that whoever did adjourn does get the credit? Is that like a big deal? Or can we skip it?
On my end, it's not a big deal. And sometimes it's hard for me to see who it is. So
Sure.
I probably thought it was you that said it. But
Well,
if
I don't
somebody
mind.
wants to pipe up, they can, but
I didn't know if somebody wanted the notoriety for closing the meeting, but so I'll just let it stand unless somebody feels like that needs to be corrected. Thank you. Gina, I feel like I've seen you like 3 times this week. I don't know, it's good and bad.
Yeah, Mike and Bethany and I were in a meeting just a couple of hours ago, and we were like, see you soon.
Melanie too, I think, was there.
Rebecca, let me know whenever you guys are ready on your end.
I'm ready. We're ready. You can go anytime.
All right. I'd like to call the November 17th, 2020 meeting of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Ad Hoc Committee to order. I'm Mike Brandt. I'll start by calling the roll of the members who are here. When I state your name, you can just say here. And I'm noting that co-chair Joe Lewis is already here. Correct? There you go.
Yep, here.
Somewhere tropical. Allison Voller.
Here.
Audrey Deppin.
Here.
Bethany Pottinger.
Here.
Kathy Cattell.
Here.
Christy Scheppelman.
Here.
Diane Rusk.
Here.
Gina Pagel.
Here.
Isabella Moore.
Here.
Laura.
Here.
Laura, there you go. Melanie.
Here.
Melissa Hernandez.
Here.
I think that's Michelle Berg I see walking around.
Here.
Monique Mobley.
Here.
Pam Potter.
Here.
Sam Kaufman.
Here.
Stephanie Shevchik.
Here.
Katie Grundle.
Here.
And I think Mike Pisani just came in.
Here.
And Tim Shell.
Here.
Did I miss anyone? All right, hearing no one there, I would hear a motion to approve or discuss the minutes from the October 20th meeting.
I make a motion.
Motion to approve the minutes as written with the amendment of correcting the person who made the motion that is credited to Ms. Mobley, or just leave it as is with a motion was made. Joel, I'll just second your motion, although I find it ironic you and I are making the motion when neither of us were here.
Yeah.
All in favor say aye.
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 All opposed say nay. All right, next item on the agenda is consideration of methods for collecting data and information to inform the work of the committee. As you can all see on the agenda, the purpose of this item is to finalize the concept of what we want to be able to do, discussion of the resources that we need, and requests for these need to be brought to the full board for any additional consideration. And I'm admitting, I believe Ms. Strakota. So the subcommittee got together and has recommendations. Go ahead, discuss.
Okay, we made a plan, but we didn't talk about who was going to talk about the plan. So I'll get started, and then the rest of my friends can jump in. So we kind of took a deep dive into the National Education Association Opportunity Audit, and we made a form called the Equity Audit Subcommittee's Recommendations. And I believe that was shared out. Is that right?
It's also linked in the official board documents here. Yep.
Yes. Thanks. So a lot of the information on this is the same information that we had shared before, but we wanted to then say, okay, so here's what we think we should do with this. We do think that this is the best option for an audit tool. It is somewhat customizable in that there are 7 different criteria, and we can do those criteria in whatever order we would want to. We also might want to consider whether existing efforts with Nehemiah or the National Equity Project could complete portions so that we're being efficient and we're not duplicating things. We thought that one option that might work, because this audit tool can be done by any group of people that we decide should be doing it, we thought it would make sense for this committee to be the ones doing the audit. And so we could do that at these meetings. Like if we would set aside a certain number of minutes at each meeting, we could go line by line through the audit, answer the questions that we're able to answer. If there are items that we feel like we need more information about, we could kind of put a pin in that and then come back to it, deciding on who we need to ask or how we need to get more information. And then once the audit would be complete, then we would look at some next steps. Melanie or Gina or Kathy, do you want to jump in at all?
I guess just to say, Michelle was able to join us for our last subcommittee meeting, so thank you for joining us and giving your input as well, Michelle. The other part of this is that there's like a light version of the audit called an opportunity checklist. And then there's the deeper dive, which is the actual opportunity audit. So if we were looking for input from others outside of this group, the opportunity checklist might be a manageable tool for staff or families or students to kind of give some baseline information at a surface level. And we're open to discussion with the other committee members about whether we feel like this group should take on this work, or if it should, be of a smaller committee. We just were unsure of, our plans for future work of this group. And so it seemed like this would give us some direction. So if others have thoughts about that, feel free to share that or let us know what questions you have.
This is Joel. I'm sorry, did I cut somebody off?
I just wanted to make sure I expanded on one more thing, Joel, before we open up for questions, if that's all right. Thank you. So Bethany talked about customizability of it, and another thing we discussed is how they purposefully leave space at the bottom of their prompts that allows us to add additional prompts that we might find are missing from the audit. For example, maybe something specifically about extracurricular activities needs to be on there, and then we can use their criteria to measure that as well. So that's another thing that we liked about that.
So what I was saying before was I actually do like the idea of this group actually doing the audit. That sounds like doable. I guess we just have to kind of see what that's going to entail. And I guess my second question would be, how much time would you need if we do this audit ourselves? How much time would you need each meeting?
Yeah, that was something we discussed. Different criteria might take different amounts of time. So like some of the things might be lengthier discussions and some might be shorter discussions. So we thought it might make sense to just say, okay, we're going to set aside this many minutes per meeting and then get through as much as we get through in that meeting and then continue on the next time, just because it seems like there could be some questions that take a really long time to discuss and other questions that might be really fast.
Another idea might be, instead of taking up the meeting to do that, maybe another space or another time to do that, right? Because if you're saying that it might take some time, we don't want to rush it so we can get to the next one, right? So maybe we can think about as a group actually saying, okay, let's take this day or this time and just focus on the audit. Any thoughts with anyone?
The one thing that we did talk about when we were talking about who would do the audit is that we want to make sure that we have really good representation from staff members and community members and students. And whether like this committee has a lot of that already, like we have really good representation here. Whether we need some more representation, we might say that we do. But we just want to make sure that we don't have like too small of a subcommittee where we're not having all the voices that we need represented.
Diane, go ahead.
So I don't know if I'm looking in the exact right place, but I was following some of the links and I see the frameworks, but I think maybe, I feel like I might be confusing it with other ones, but I feel like there was maybe something more comprehensive. So I'm trying to get a sense of, well, first of all, when I'm looking at the frameworks for, is it the Great Public School Framework? Is that the right place? That's okay. So, so I'm thinking about, okay, let's say we're doing conditions of teaching and learning was, the topic for the meeting. And and I'm wondering, how do we, it feels like there's certain data we would need, or what I'm trying to get at is, how do we get at the information that allows us to do that audit? Because I might not know what teachers are thinking about the climate in the classroom and that sort of thing. And so can you help me with that? Sorry if I'm a little slow on it.
I think that's a great question. One of the things that would be important is if we do this together as this committee, we would need to be sure that we knew, in advance of the meeting, for purposes of public notice and for just preparation of ourselves and our ability to participate in the discussion. So we would need to know in advance of each meeting what our topics would be. And to me, it seems feasible that we would be able to seek out information between these meetings. I don't know if Tim might have a different perspective, and maybe it depends on the topic. Mel, were you going to add something as well? I saw you.
I was just going to say that if we can do our best to try to come prepared with the appropriate data, but then as we discuss and dialogue as a committee, we might recognize that we don't have the full picture and that we need to, again, pause on that specific prompt, note that we need certain types of data, maybe assign who can bring that data for the next meeting, and then move on and make sure that we come back to that exact item in the future.
Yeah, I could see that just kind of how it's set up in the prompt, it might get us to ask questions, and that might be, I wonder if it almost is like a couple rounds with each, because the first time around, we're sort of discovering the questions to ask and thinking about them, and then realizing there's something we need to be able to reach a conclusion.
So in my mind, we could do both. I would suggest coming up with a schedule of work for the meetings, and we would do our best collectively to gather information and share it in advance of the topic coming up on the agenda. And if we were so fortunate as to get ahead of ourselves, folks that were interested with more downstream topics might be able to look at the resources and say, I like this, but is there more? But certainly if we need to come back and develop more information, we can certainly do that. We definitely want to know the topics in advance of each meeting, though.
Laura, go ahead.
I'm wondering if there might be merit in trying to break up into different subgroups to sort of delegate this information, and within each subgroup, whether we're focusing on a topic of priority, then as a group we decide what's the data that needs to be collected, how can we collect that data, when can we bring it back, and then if we have like 2 or 3 groups working simultaneously, then really that data comes back to the group to analyze as a whole, and then we decide that next set of priority things to then break out into.
I think that's a really intriguing idea and a good way to get lots of voices on it. And I'm wondering if we are just super conscious about what those subcommittees look like and make sure that we divide it so we have student voice, community voice, and educator voice on all the committees as well. I think if we're purposeful for that, I think that structure could be viable.
And then I should add that at the last meeting, I talked about looking into other districts who have used this tool before. And I was involved in some groups who were discussing this tool last year. I had forgotten that last year was the first year of the tool. So it's a 2019 audit tool. And so there's not a lot of districts who have implemented it. I reached out to contacts at WEAC, and they put me in touch with one pretty large district that I will follow up with, but I have not had a chance to do that. So I can see if there are any insights At a more basic level, I've spoken with educators from other districts in the area who have used it only at like a teacher by teacher or building by building level to start some conversations. And it wasn't done in its fully intended, full formed way. So we would be kind of leading in this area, and then we could share our experience. But so far, unfortunately, I don't have a lot to report about how it has been used in the past. Additionally, we talked about who we might reach out to for support or to help guide us through this process. And again, I spoke with WEAC contacts who said that they would put us in touch directly with NEA staff who helped to develop the tool. And we spoke, Tim can speak a little bit to this, we spoke to our leaders at the Nehemiah group, who's taking the social studies team through some curriculum review and professional development this year. And they have their own tool that they're going to be using with our district. So they're, I think we'll be able to use their findings, but it may not be that they, take on a certain chunk, or that they have the staff to, help walk us through our own tool. So I think in a different way, we'll get some guidance, but I did not find in any of my contacts someone who will, handhold through the process. And I'm not sure, Tim, if you ended up hearing from any of the other partners about that possibility.
We've put out some feelers and I haven't had any concrete responses back.
Okay. Thanks for looking into that. So other questions or suggestions from other committee members about it?
So did we decide, or are we contemplating that we're going to do it during our regular meetings, or are we going to set up a different time? And then the other question would be about the subcommittees. Are we going to do the subcommittees, or are we going to do it as a whole?
I haven't heard a final decision about that, some discussion, but perhaps we start with next time taking a look at the checklist, just so that people have a sense of what all of the different categories of school readiness, curriculum, school climate, educator, or effectiveness of educators, academic outcomes, and family engagement, all, and funding, all, how they all play a part in the discussion about equity. Maybe that would be a good starting point, and allow us to further consider how we want to tackle the deeper dive. But if others have ideas, I guess now would be the time to share.
It sounds like, are we then at a place where we're thinking that this is the tool we're going to adopt, and then from that point perhaps go into prioritizing areas? I think that's kind of what I hear being tabled. But I don't know the Robert's Rules of Orders of all that.
Yeah, I mean, I think Mike spoke before about, Bethany, I keep seeing your cat, I'm sorry. Mike spoke to the fact that we would likely need to get board support for the specific audit tool. So okay. In my mind, in advance of any further steps, we would bring this document that's a recommendation. If the committee supports this recommendation, we would bring it to the board for approval.
I mean, honestly, I don't think we really do need board approval for it because of the
okay.
line I'm looking on here where it says cost free. If there's no
okay.
cost to it, I don't think there's any need to go to the board because the board would be approving any expense. So I don't think there's a need for it. I'll bring it up at the next regular board meeting in December. We don't have meetings until December 14th, 12th or so. So I'll bring it up that this is what the committee's planning on doing if that's what we choose to do today. And I sincerely doubt anyone would object. And if they do, they can at that time when we go over the minutes for this meeting.
Thank you for that.
Diane, go ahead. You had your hand up.
Oh, yeah. I think it would be, I would agree that it would be a good idea to take the next meeting to go through the actual grids that have all the prompts on it, because one thing I look at this is there's a lot of state, you know, the state provides this, the state provides that, and then there are a couple districts, and there's sometimes it says schools, and it might be helpful to just, I understand this might be more state focused than district focused, but it might just be good to know the unit of analysis that we're kind of looking at, and then maybe we could also, you know, order and decide, you know, what we want to do first in terms of an order of approaching these, and maybe even, you know, if we really, if you know, it's okay to dedicate a chunk of time toward this at the next meeting, you know, we could scan this. It's long, but it's not so long that, you know, we can't within the next month take a good look at it. Sort of have immediate questions of, well, where are we going to get that data from? And, or at least for the one that we want to do for the next couple meetings, we could have that discussion, and that way it would go faster. So maybe we could integrate it into a meeting. But I can see, you know, where, you know, Joel is coming from of, gee, it might take up a lot of time within a meeting, or we don't want to feel rushed. So on the other hand, I'm not sure what other items that we're going to be addressing, and if this is a priority, then maybe it's okay that we spend most of our time on this for every meeting. Thanks.
I have a quick question, and I apologize if I missed this when this was originally talked about, but do we have a timeline or expectation of when we ideally would have the audit complete? Because I feel like, would that help us prioritize the order of the work as well?
Not that I know of. I mean, the timeline of the whole committee itself, Mike, remind me, was a year and a half?
Flexible.
Make that up? Okay. Yeah. So I agree that would be a good thing to consider.
And maybe I'm like goal orientated that way, just wondering what, you know, like when we would need to have this to make any next recommendations. But I just feel like, could that help us figure out the priorities of what we need to do?
I think that would also then define if the work would be able to get done within the meetings we have here versus subcommittee meetings to bring it back to here. Like if the work is more than the amount of time, like we're only meeting every 2 to 3 weeks. If we don't have that many meetings and that much time to complete this, yet our deadline is here, it kind of defines how the process needs to be laid out.
And that's also saying that there will be no other issues that come up that we need to address.
Well, right, if this is going to consume quite a bit of time within our committee meetings, we have all those other charges. When are we going to fit those other charges into this meeting as well?
I would say that one thing about this tool is that it does cover so many of the charges. So that's one of the reasons that we selected it, because it's kind of all encompassing. But I agree that we also need to just consider what our other immediate goals are for the committee to determine how much time we can dedicate during our meetings.
I also think if we don't use this tool or version of this tool, what would we establish as baseline for the charges, and to know that we're making progress with any of the things that we're going to do?
The tool might also prioritize the charges that we need to work on.
Outside of the tool, I mean, what are charges? I know that we're collecting information to inform next steps. So outside of that, what is the other purpose of this group that I might be missing?
I guess when I say charges, I was thinking of what came out of the board meeting to create this ad hoc committee. And it had that list of maybe 8 of them. I would have to find it in the folder as to the other things. You know, it talked about hiring practices, it talked about funding, it talked about
Those are all part of this audit.
yeah, right. And so that was maybe the audit is our top priority because it's then going to prioritize all the other things that we need to do.
I think that's the ultimate purpose of its creation, is knowing that districts probably have multiple areas that they need to grow in, and then kind of identifying which ones are the most critical, and then working through critical ones, and then working through the ones that, you know, need attention as well, but maybe aren't as critical in that exact moment. So prioritizing.
So kind of am hearing from the group that it seems like the tool and going through the process is our #1 priority. And we need, by doing that, then we will identify what our next steps are, or the district's next steps, because our job is to inform the district as to what they should do or change. So I guess I put the motion together, like, I think the more work we can do is getting voice from the whole group rather than subgroups and not getting everybody. I kind of think the whole group's voice, even though a larger group is sometimes harder to work through all this, but I don't want to leave anyone's voice out by saying a subcommittee is going to volunteer to do this.
Yeah.
Oh,
You
go ahead.
Through that as a motion to just have this be a regular agenda item for the full committee, then, if there's a second for that.
So moved.
Second that.
I'll second.
Can I add to that as a piece? I would like to figure out a way, if we're going to meet in a whole group, to get equity of voice in our conversations, because I think that there are some of us, me being one of them, that can monopolize time because it's easier for me to jump in. So if we're going to be in a whole group, how can we make sure that every voice is heard?
I would say that in our committee discussions, we have talked about, you know, outside facilitation, but if we are taking this on as a committee, then we would need to consider if the subcommittee becomes kind of like the, you know, we were initially just exploring the options. And so our work as the subcommittee is maybe done, but does this group want a group to continue to meet in order to prepare and to make sure that the data is at hand, to make sure that we've got clarity in what the discussion will look like? Or is that something that the chairs want to do? I mean, in terms of facilitating and preparing for this.
You know, I think as we're talking as a group, right, obviously we don't have everybody here now, right? And it can get kind of challenging when we're all trying to, you know, maybe say something, maybe somebody's less, you know, more reserved. But I think we just have to make an effort in terms of just kind of asking those questions and having people give input, because I think what's going to happen is we might just get a core group of people who are just the spokespeople, right? And then that view is just coming from that group of people and everybody's just agreeing. So I guess I think I do like the idea, because the subgroup, you guys have already worked on this, right? So it's just like, to me, for you guys leading it, I mean, I don't really have an issue with that. I think the thing is we just got to figure out how that's going to merge into the bigger group, right? We don't want the subgroup doing all the work and then the bigger groups just agreeing with it, right? We have to see how we can all just be able to participate.
I mean, having looked at the indicators, this could be just a 1 or 2 meeting thing too. I'm not sure it's going to take us a lot of time to do this instrument and then move on to further work on an audit.
I'm just thinking about, and some of us that work for the district have been a part of this, but like, I'm thinking of grade level PLCs that have done this. The past couple of weeks, we were looking at report card indicators of what needed to be included in a productive way. There's like teams of 12 to 15 teachers trying to decide on things. And we put it into like an electronic version. So we went kind of item by item. People were allowed to vote, and it kind of narrowed down what the team, in most parts, kind of it gave some indication of where people were leaning towards, and then it also allowed us to go item by item and talk about the different pieces as well. But it just allowed everyone to be involved in the process, and I felt like it was very efficient. So I don't know if any other K4 people want to speak to that.
So I kind of created that process for our K4 staff to create those work habits within grade level teams. It was adapted from an adaptive school protocol that if some of our staff members have been trained in, where you like hang, here's the question and then you kind of vote where it would be, and there's like a gallery walk. Well, we can't obviously do a gallery walk in this environment. So it allowed for everybody to at least initially put their voice out there as to where they were feeling it was felt, and then we opened up the room for discussion, and people could all see the results. So really it was put into a Google form. Everyone filled out the Google form ahead of time, and then we got to see the results. We could do something very similar in Zoom. You could use polls, and there's a whole bunch of options, or we could look at a different adaptive school discussion protocol to adapt to fit this tool.
My mind went straight to adaptive schools and some type of voting protocol to gain all voice prior to opening up like verbal discussion.
I just have a comment. I don't know if I'm the only one who feels this way, but there's a lot of vocabulary and a lot of kind of terminologies that you all are using that I don't know if everyone else is familiar with them. I mean, I don't want to sound like I'm the odd duck in the room here, but honestly, it's like a lot of the things that you're talking about, I'm going like, I've been working in our school district for 10 years, and like I have never been in that high level of a meeting and discussion, and I'm feeling like not exactly sure what input I'm going to have here. And then we have people who are not school employees that, haven't seen some of the processes, and we have students. So I'm just curious, I'm like, am I the one feeling like a little bit like an odd duck here, that I don't totally follow how to do an audit? Because when I look at these things, there's a lot of thought and data and things that need to be pulled in. And are we the experts on what different departments are doing, or what different areas are doing, what students are feeling? I don't know. So I'm just throwing it out there that I love the idea of doing this, but I'm not exactly sure where I personally would be fitting in terms of moving the conversation forward.
I mean, the good thing of being a group is that we have many experts, right? So I think it's about verbalizing, like you just verbalized, if we're not understanding something, and then having that explained so everybody understands it. I do agree with you, Monique, about that as well. Like, obviously, some of these terms I don't understand. I mean, I understand the gist, but I guess I feel like for me, if I didn't understand something, I would say, oh, I don't understand. Could you please explain that more? And I think we just have to have a group consensus that that's how we're going to move forward when we're having these discussions.
Monique, I apologize if my explanation of the voting process was using language around adaptive school training, but more or less all it is a procedures that we ask the whole group. There would be a facilitator. That facilitator would tell the group how to engage in the discussion. So it'd be a very structured discussion. It wouldn't be like this where it's open-ended and anybody can just jump in. Everybody would initially get some type of voice put into the room. And then there would probably be an open discussion after that, allowing people to advocate one way or the other as to why maybe they voted what they did. Prior to the voting, we probably would have to go over vocabulary of the like what you're voting on, making sure everyone has common understanding of that, and then there would be some type of process that everyone, step one, everyone's going to place this here. Step two, this is what we're going to do. And the facilitator is really there just to lead them through that process until a decision is made. And then like a motion is almost put forward, just like there would be here. Does that give you a little more clarity of what I was speaking of?
Yes, thank you. And it's not that I don't feel I will have something to offer to the conversation. It's just I feel like this is really big. And how do we get it into a way where we're able to just pull it together with all the different grade levels and all the different departments that we have? It's just a lot of pieces, and I don't think that we're all represented for that.
Yep, I think that's important perspective, and I think that's why I'm advocating to have a set group of people who are preparing each time to make certain that we're able to facilitate a conversation in a way that includes everybody's voice equally and that seeks out information that we feel that we're missing. And adaptive schools is a training, a way of operating that some of us have been exposed to, and really it's about facilitating discussion and helping to make decisions. So I think it would be a good guide for us in this process. So are there people who are interested in being in that preparation crew and data seeking crew in order to facilitate? Seems like that's what we need to decide before next meeting.
Diane, go ahead.
I think that's a really good idea. And one thing that strikes me is that I'm wondering if it's the same people all the time. And I'm just thinking, you know, kind of looking through them, I sort of asked myself some questions of, well, gosh, if I was answering this, I might say yes, and, because I'm not exactly sure how the question is posed and how do we really know that. And especially, you know, I'm thinking of, you know, the student voices on here. There's some places where, you know, it's a student perspective that's really important, and the students actually might have some additional questions for us to consider. So I'm wondering if, you know, maybe it's not the same people all the time. You know, when it's, again, the classroom and teaching, maybe it's really important to have some students sort of prepping for the facilitation so that we're sure that we're thinking of, you know, the people that are in the classroom receiving the information, as well as, you know, teachers too in that discussion. So, and that would also ease the load if, you know, maybe we all, you know, could volunteer to help with, you know, one of them or something like that, then it sort of spreads the preparation around. And this is the last thing I'll say, and I suppose, you know, the one role of the facilitator is that, you know, and I'm one of the people that sort of has a big mouth, at least tonight, is if I'm facilitating, I can't give input, right? So it just frees it up for other people to talk, because the facilitator is just guiding the discussion, not responding to the questions. I love the adaptive classroom idea too.
All right, well, I guess, is there any further discussion on kind of what Katie brought up there in terms of having this go through the full-on committee? I don't know if that limits anything. I mean, it sounds like Gina's suggestion for having some people who are able to take the lead on that's a good one, but we have a motion that's been raised and then seconded, so we should conclude that one way or the other. Any further discussion on Katie's motion to proceed and have the audit go through the full ad hoc committee instead of a subcommittee? Seeing none, all in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed, say nay. All right, so then I guess concluding that, Gina, do you have thoughts about people putting, I mean, we've had previous people put a message into the full committee saying they're willing to help get started as facilitating. I'm not qualified to facilitate, I'll say that from the get-go. But if others are, I mean, I would encourage them to do that too. If we need an outside facilitator, then the next question is there a cost along with that? And if it's a small enough cost, it might not be a full board question because administration can approve certain things as needed over time too. So any thoughts on that?
I'm curious, how many people might be on the committee here that have the adaptive schools training? Because the adaptive schools has that protocol. I know there's a few of us, so I see quite a few hands. If we at least have one person on each group that's planning, they might be able to bring to that subgroup that's planning each time those different protocols to be in discussion. Just an idea.
Okay.
Correct me if I'm wrong. I thought we just passed a motion that we weren't doing subgroups. They were bringing to the whole group.
Maybe I'm speaking it incorrectly. I thought I heard facilitation, maybe rotating, but maybe I'm not meaning subgroup, meaning taking control. I'm meaning rotating facilitation in order to dig in. Sorry, Katie. Thank you for clarifying.
Thanks.
That was my understanding as well.
Okay. I'm happy to help plan and lead. I'm even happy to facilitate. I think we have enough school voice on here that as a facilitator, I don't know if I wouldn't get a vote as part of the discussion. You know, someone co-facilitating this large of a group, and especially over Zoom, if we're running like a poll or something in the background, like that's going to be very complicated to do both the speaking and all the tech work at the same time. So I'll throw it out there that I'm happy to plan or join the subcommittee to plan and facilitate if needed. I think there's enough school voice for voting purposes.
Yeah, I guess I'm wondering if any of the people who know the tool best already would be interested in planning for that first meeting just to get a start on it. I would be willing to serve in that role if other subcommittee members would want to kick off the first one with me.
I'm certainly willing to help. I know it was really difficult for us to find a common time, but I'm willing to try again.
That's honestly my worry. It's finding a common time for all of us to meet to do that.
All right. Well, if anybody else wants to chime in and also help, please feel free to do so, you know, offline too. I think that brings us to the next part of the meeting. The next agenda item is the proposed joint book study with the village regarding the white racial frame. Tim, you want to discuss this part?
I can, yeah. Thank you, Mike. So the district has been approached by the village, just as the district's engaged in diversity, equity, and inclusion work, so is the village as of late. And the village approached the district about entering jointly into a book study. And the concept would be a text called The White Racial Frame by Joe Fegan. He's a fairly prominent American sociologist. It's a book that the County Schools Equity Consortium did a book study on this summer. The model is actually, as proposed by the village, very similar. But this would be members of the greater Waunakee community. The village's vision is potentially up to 200 participants. The Waunakee Neighborhood Connection would also be involved in this. And the concept would be that while it would be open to anyone in the greater Waunakee community, there would be some specific recruitment effort made for village staff service organization, leadership, other potential influencers in the community. But again, a fairly large group, up to 200. And following the model that the schools consortium did this summer, the village is proposing that the project would contract with the two facilitators that did the DCEC book study this summer, and that would be Percy Brown and Rainey Briggs. And so because this would be involving some skilled facilitation, there is a cost associated with this beyond the cost of the texts. So there's the cost of the books and the cost of the facilitation. And, you know, overall, this would probably come in total, probably around 13 or 14,000. The village's proposal is the village would provide $5,000 of backing, the district would provide $5,000 in backing, and then we would solicit contributions or grant funding for the remainder. And, you know, certainly, you know, $5,000 is not a small amount of money. It is something that we could pick up within the district budget. It's a sum that doesn't actually require board level authorization, but it's a pretty big commitment, and not just the financial commitment. It's a very highly visible partnership between the village and the community in sponsoring a book study around a text that would really get, I think, conversations advanced. And so, you know, when I discussed the matter with Randy, you know, we felt it would be good to bring it into this space to see what the sense of this committee was around doing something jointly with village like this. Was there anybody else on here among some of our school folks on here that participated in the book study this summer? Katie, were you a part of that? And Laura,
Yep.
were you a part of that?
I actually believe both of us
Anik
were.
as well. Yeah, okay.
That was a eye-opening book study for me, to get a historical perspective, to have an understanding of how white fragility is occurring, to have the white frame of how people are acting within our systems, and not even really realizing that they're acting in this white frame. I would highly recommend it. It is a dense read. There was some parts of the book that I had to like read and go, ooh, I'm not sure I fully comprehended that. I need to reread that. And but it was a really, really good book study. It was facilitated by some awesome people too.
I'll add on my end. I think one of the most powerful pieces is that as a school, we can be in partnership with the larger community where we really need this work to be unfolding. And instead of the school saying, we're doing this, join us, we're actually joining them in partnership, and we can lift it together. So, you know, doing that under the guise of people that know what they're doing and lifting this work is really, really powerful.
Tim, would they actually reach out to adaptive schools to run all those breakout rooms again, or who would run all those breakout rooms?
That's a good question. I think if we were to do this, then there would be some recruitment of facilitators, and of part of what the consultants, Percy and Rainey, would do, part of their role, in addition to like the large group facilitation, would be to do some coaching up of individual facilitators. And I do think that they would be looking at people within the community and large number within the school district that have had adaptive schools training and or participated in the book study before that might be willing to facilitate the breakouts. But we would probably, you know, the whole recruitment, I think the first thing is this would have to get approved, and then some of the finer details would kind of be the next step in the planning.
Yeah, I also wonder, oh, go ahead.
Do you know if this is a book that would be appropriate for high school students to also take part in this? How readable is it? Do you know much about it?
So I think I think it is it's not a scholarly text in terms of being limited to a narrowly academic audience, Pam. But as Katie said, it's a substantial text. I think a high school student with typical reading skills that was interested in the topic would find the topic accessible. I do think you have to be interested in the topic and have that interest to really get engaged with the book.
I'm actually reading two books right now that I would say would be really good books for like a high school level. One of them is called This Book Is Not Racist, and the other one is called Stamped, Rewritten, or Rewind, don't quote me on that part, Stamped something. And the stamped one I would say is kind of comparable to the white racial frame, but it's written more in like a jazzy, it's going to get drawn into connection. It's not quite as deep.
Monique, you were in the book study this summer, weren't you?
I was, and I'm also in the book study that Chuck Murphy is doing right now about, so you want to talk about race and racism, but I think that the breakout rooms are where the heavy hitting happens. I think it'll be really interesting to hear what the moderators kind of introduce the chapters and what they have to say about that as the big picture, but I think the crux of where people get into some good discussion is in those breakout rooms, and having some good facilitators in those rooms makes a big difference. And I've enjoyed both of the book studies. I think this is good. I don't know, when I did the last one with the library and the WNC, who had sponsored one right towards the end of the summer, it was an extremely small group. So I hope that they're able to build more on what they would like to do. I think that the intent is there. The question is how to get the word out to get people to participate. If we're looking at, up to $15,000 of an investment, you need to have the community willing. I know the school district is willing. We have over 50 people in our school book discussions, but I don't know that there's that same interest in the community. And I know the library and WNC have tried in the past. So maybe having the village behind them will change that, but I don't know.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that's an important question that I don't have an answer to. In the planning meeting I was in, I can tell you that Todd Schmidt, the village administrator, is personally invested in this. He would like to see this be a big success with a high level of community involvement. We talked about offering it on 2 different times during the week, so potentially a weeknight evening and maybe a Saturday session to accommodate the schedules of different people. And speaking frankly, we are potentially coming up on a winter where our options for activities outside our homes will be a little more restricted than they have been in the past, and perhaps more restricted than they were in the summer. And part of our discussion was that the timing for something of this nature might be, particularly timely.
Melanie, you've had your hand up for quite a while. Go ahead.
So I was just wondering if that book is a definite or if there's any dialogue about different texts. I know nothing of this book. I just Googled it as people were talking. And I just noticed that this man happens to be an expert in racism and sexism, who is a 85-year-old white man. And I just was wondering if it is the perspective we're seeking right now, or if there's other texts that might be a little more modern, as well as maybe a different perspective than we've had. It might be really well written and researched. I have no idea. I just wanted to put that out in the space.
Can I offer the two people that run the book study, the fact that they have picked this text, they are phenomenal at taking it and capturing the main pieces and then adding their viewpoints in those speaking sessions. So I honor what you're saying, Mel, in terms of it's a white author, but it's also two, people of color driving this instruction through a lens. I think that's really beneficial for the people in the group. Just another perspective.
The one thing I think I would just say on that point too is that when Tim initially brought this up to me and Joel to put on the meeting today, and I'd actually heard of Joe Fegan as a sociology undergrad. And my comment on this is that he was basically doing this kind of work prior to it being in vogue and prior to it being something that people could write about and get on the speaking circuit. This is like his entire life and his entire career. So I appreciate also what was said there about how this was picked by people who I think we have a lot of respect for. So sorry, go ahead, whoever else is going to.
I was going to say, so Tim, what are you looking for the whole committee to commit to it? Or are you looking for a number of members?
So that's a good question, Michelle. Not looking for everybody to commit to participate, although I think I would highly recommend it if schedules allow. I think folks who have had facilitation training or have participated in this text before certainly would be a big invitation to help potentially step forward and help with facilitation for the breakouts. The main thing is, we haven't done a joint partnership like this with the village, and Randy and I didn't want to make a unilateral decision on the behalf of the district where we have an entire ad hoc committee with multiple stakeholders on it specifically to have discussions about our work in this area. So that's why it's on the agenda, to kind of see if this is something the committee is comfortable with endorsing, and if that's the case, we would go forward with it. And certainly invite everybody on the committee to participate if you're able, but you're not committing yourself personally to participate in the book study if it doesn't work for your schedule or something like that.
I just would like to add that I think that, if this does go forward, I applaud Waunakee Village. I applaud the schools. I'm assuming the Chamber of Commerce could get involved with this, our libraries. I mean, we're kind of putting our money where our mouth is. And I think that that's, do we love the book? Is this the right book? I mean, those are all open questions. But I think the fact that you have such a large and prestigious group of leaders in the community that are coming from, you probably get the churches involved in this. I mean, you're bringing people from all different groups in our community together, and I'm all for giving it a shot. I think that we have not too much to lose, and this could really be something that says Waunakee is working to make a difference, and that's something that I could stand behind.
I guess I'll kind of call the overall question of this, and I'm glad you brought that up, Monique, and I hope I didn't make too much of a face there. I guess the one thing I will say about all this is talk is cheap, and in the grand scheme of things, $5,000 is cheap too. And I'm hopeful that we can all work on doing some things that make changes to policies that have an actual effect. And I don't want what's coming out of either our community or the village to just be, oh, we did a book study on that and we put out a resolution and that's it. Because I think there's a lot more we have to do beyond that as well. So Tim, are you just kind of looking at general consensus as to whether or not the committee thinks this is a good idea for the board to say thumbs up to for next month?
Yes.
Okay. So is anyone, go ahead, Joel, sorry.
Yeah, so I just want to say, so when Tim brought this up, I think it's a good idea. There's going to be people who don't want to do a book study, and obviously that's their right. But I think because the school board and the village are doing something jointly, I'm behind that. Anything that they do jointly, because there's not much of that's happening. So I feel like, people are either going to be on board or not be on board with this, but I feel like any type of education, when we start talking about diversity, racism, anything, and this is just one topic, right? So there could be other topics we might address at a later time. So, I mean, I totally back the idea. When I was telling Tim, I said, you know, you think about time. I'm more of like an audiobook type person, but I'm not driving in a car anymore. So, but I do like the fact that there's 2 separate days. So if one doesn't work for you, then you can use another. Maybe if you don't want to do Saturdays, you can do the weekday. So I do have to say, I think it's something we should support because, you know, especially when it comes to resources, you know, they're spending money on something good, and I think that this is something good.
So is anyone in opposition at all to recommending this? Okay, hearing and seeing no one, I think gives our answer. Okay.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Yeah, so the last thing we have on the specific agenda is discussion of events within the school district and the state and nation as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Joel, do you want to kind of take the lead on this? This is your subject you wanted to add on.
Yeah, so I was the one who put that on the agenda last time, and sorry I wasn't here to talk about it. But the thing is that I think about this committee and I think where it stemmed from. You know, we're doing a lot of great things in terms of ideas and charges we want to do, and we're trying to prioritize that stuff. But my thing is that there's also a lot of other issues that have been going on within the village and within the school district. Well, let's focus on the school district that we do have to have discussions about. You know, I think about the student who had the Confederate flag. What irritated me as a parent is that there's a student walking around in the school with a Confederate flag. Especially, I'm a Black man and my kids are biracial, and the exposure to that. And, you know, I know other things that are happening in the school that we don't really know about. And I think this committee, I think we have to get to a place where we can have these conversations, you know, agree or disagree, because there are going to be tough things, decisions that we have to make. What happens if tomorrow, next week, something happens, an incident, and then us as a committee, we have to try to figure out the best solution, or how do we have those conversations? So the reason why I'm saying that, the reason why I put that on the agenda, I wanted to encompass what we're doing here. So for instance, right, I also think about that mural that's in the school, the Native American mural, right? We really haven't even spoken about that. And that is something that is in our school. And, you know, we have to feel free to be able to have these discussions. You know, I think about when incidents happen in classrooms. How are teachers dealing with those issues? Are they given the support to be able to handle it in a correct way? So I guess just to kind of wrap it up, I just feel like as a group, we have to be able and comfortable to have these conversations and not to avoid these things. And then when we know things are happening, we have to bring it to the table and we have to have the discussion, because a lot of things are happening behind the scenes. And honestly, you know, since we are doing all these great things to move forward, we also need to encompass that as well. So I just want to kind of open it up to the group, just what they think in terms of how do we handle racial issues? How do we handle, you know, incidents of sexism? How do we handle, obviously we're talking about curriculum, but how do we handle these day-to-day, everyday students interacting in certain ways? What do we do about that as a group?
If I can jump in, I really appreciate you bringing this up. I think this is incredibly important, and I think that this is probably one of the reasons that each one of us decided to serve on this committee. I'm wondering if we could start by just getting more information about the incidents that have happened in the community. Maybe just kind of compile a list of things that have happened that we know about, because very often these things just don't get out. And just think maybe the things that happened in the last year and keep adding to these, and possibly even setting aside time for every meeting just to bring these things up. Just a thought.
I do like that idea about the compiling. You know, it's crazy. Most of the information I get are from people in the community who just send it to me. So if they didn't send it to me, I wouldn't even know about it. So, you know, and again, I don't want to put, you know, Isabella, I don't want to put you on the spot. But I really want to hear your voice as a student, especially as a student of color. Like, what things are happening in the school that you think maybe the teachers or the adults are just missing, that type of thing, where we could be helpful in having those conversations?
Well, like, as you guys can see, I'm a child of, like, I'm mixed. So it's like, I'm called the N-word. The N-word has been said in front of me in class, and there has been multiple occasions where nothing has been done. The teacher has heard the N-word. The teachers have heard me get called the N-word, and nothing has been done. And even, like, I just remember, like, I told a teacher about it, and they just like brush it off like it's nothing. And it's like, this affects me like an everyday basis, like, especially with, like, not with, like, hope, because, like, things have been, like, you can't really, like, call someone the N-word and get away with it now. But I just feel like definitely, like, before COVID, and definitely, like, during that time period, it was just like, it just, like, made me, like, not feel welcome at the high school, especially walking around and seeing my classmates wearing the Confederate flag, or getting called N-word when walking down the hallway, or when I come out of I'm in the Black Student Union, walking out of there and everyone just staring at you when they never seen, like, all the Black students get together. Like, there have been, like, like, the BSU females, like, all minorities can have like, each one of us can have, like, 2 pages worth of everything that we've been through. And yeah, that's where I stand. I just, like, these conversations just need to like, be brought up. And sorry if my internet, I just got a little notification, but, like, this needs to be, like, get brought up, because this is, like, the future of so many people, and it's just like, I don't want them going through what I've been going through. But yeah.
I'd just like to thank you so much for telling us about this. I had no idea this stuff was going on in the high school. I might get a little teary as I discuss this, so forgive me. But just as a practical suggestion, could we perhaps set up a Google Doc where we anonymously just add our things that we know about, things that we've experienced, things that we're concerned about. Just each one of us just add to that list as appropriate, and see what we come up with. And would that be a good place to start?
I like that. I agree with that, because again, we have to compile this stuff. Now, I guess my biggest thing is, and I'm just going to be transparent. Now, obviously, there's a lot of you who work for the school district. Is anybody worried about, like, retribution or even with your colleagues not being, you know, I don't know, just I think about those things. So I mean, I don't want to put anybody in a situation, but honestly, these are the hard discussions we need to have, and then we need to kind of figure out, well, what are we going to do? How are we going to change that culture, truly change the culture? So I guess my question is anybody here who works for the school worried about, you know, talking about stuff like that?
I'll speak for myself. I have been personally very outspoken in having conversations with students, with colleagues, with families, anytime something like this has come up. With that said, I personally have a passion around it and have been committed to it for a very long time. I don't know that the people that represent this group are maybe a majority. And I think, Joel, what you're bringing up is there's long-term things that have to be done, but there are right now things that are happening that are traumatic in a lot of situations that we need to start not just compiling and hearing about, but making decisions about how to remedy some of these so that people aren't hurting. And I don't have an exact answer, but I appreciate the fact that it is more urgent than just down the road after an audit as well.
I was just wondering, I don't know, Tim, if you want to speak more to this, but there is something on the horizon in our partnership with Nehemiah where there is a reporting tool through them. So then they will hear of things that are put forward by staff, by students, and then they will work in partnership with the district to kind of provide some guidance about, like, this is what we're hearing is happening, and this is what we would recommend happen in terms of, like, what is the phrase I'm looking for? Just repairing the harm that has been done, education in terms of sometimes hate is based in ignorance. And if people are allowed to continue in ignorance, then people continue to be hurt. So Tim, I don't know if you wanted to share anything about that because it's kind of just on the horizon, but I do want to give the committee the sense that it wouldn't be something that we would need to create because it's already a tool through
just super briefly, because I don't want to ripple the flow here too much. Before we do conclude the meeting, there's a specific request that Gina and I have for the group, and I would certainly welcome, probably along with Gina, since we're both a little more involved with the planning, would welcome the opportunity in a future meeting to share more information about this project, with the committee. But speaking to your point, Joel, as a director level central office administrator, I'm not the one that the critical voices are going to come to. They're much more likely to speak out and push back against the teachers and pupil services staff on here than with me. It'd be pretty bold if they came to me with something that was, pretty reactionary. But I will say, we've got a spectrum of beliefs and starting points, within the school community. I don't think there's any other way to describe it. But we have to, if we can't have these conversations now, when are we going to have these conversations? And, I can't speak to the individual tolerance of, my colleagues on the committee to take some pushback. But I think, we have to step forward in this process.
Diane, you've had your hand up for a little bit. Go ahead.
Thanks. Listening to the conversation, I was just peeking at the teaching and learning little rubric that was in the equity audit that we're going to do. And it talks about, it has sort of these very general statements as outputs, percentage of students that indicate that they feel listened to and understood by their educators. And that's sort of like a core question. And I asked myself, well, what students are saying it? And, how does that vary across different student groups? And how do we even know we have that information? And so one of the things that sort of has been triggered in this discussion is that, is there a reporting mechanism like, Gina was saying, in which if a student has an experience, is there a safe way to identify that experience was had? Because there's no way to collect data and be able to, create and identify that this is an issue if people don't feel safe saying about it. Maybe they'll say something on a survey, but sometimes if, things don't get disaggregated out, it can kind of get buried down. So I feel like it's almost like a loop. It's like, I feel like I have to have this kind of information to even go through this equity study exercise. And maybe that will make me think of other questions where we say, oh, you know, one of the findings of our equity study is that we don't have a mechanism by which students can report when they are the victim of racism. And so this is really important information, and I don't know if there's a way, a safe way, I think we talked about this way in the beginning, a safe way for student groups to be able to, like the BSU, to sort of be able to share information in a way that they don't feel, I just worry about people, you know, and identities and everything. But I do feel like we're at a little bit of a deficit. We probably all, to the Google idea, we probably could all provide at least one example. I bet we all have at least one example that sort of sticks in our minds that, you know, it's evident.
I'll make a quick comment, Diane, and then Christy, go ahead after me. I think maybe some of the students can speak to this, but I think that students are already compiling this kind of thing. And I know that there's like Instagram accounts and various other things. And I think I've talked to Sam about this at one point, is that there are students that are kind of compiling these experiences now and making it public. It's just teachers and parents and adults may or may not be aware of it. So that is out there. Sam, correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, it is to a degree.
Okay. Christy, go ahead.
I have a few thoughts on this. And I was probably one of the people that brought up in the beginning about the safety of students. Because we've had things where we've brought things up before, and then the retaliation for the students, unintended, of course, can be really hard. So I just want to be careful about any kind of Google Doc that we do put together. Monique, I'm not sure, Steph was there last or 2 weeks ago, the Sonia Doris group, which Monique, myself, and another teacher advised at the high school. We did kind of like a run through for staff of different comments and things that they have endured. And so it's always sometimes helpful, I think, to hear this stuff, because sometimes we don't realize what's actually happening to our students. And so made me realize that maybe some kind of focus group type input would be helpful, and sharing some of that. You know, some of the stuff that kids told us, you know, as they're crying, and I mean, some of our sessions are really intense just because it's a safe place for them. It is really hard to hear, but I also feel like I feel really torn. Like I want to like shout it out and be like, this is happening in our schools and our community, and we all care for each other. But I also want to do it in a format that's safe-ish. So I also go back to this whole reporting idea. I think that should be one of the, like, I look at, part of the reason I got involved in this group is the policy work. And how are we collecting this information in our schools? You know, I'm looking at Monique a little bit. I told her I pulled up the thing that we shared with staff. And, you know, some of the comments are really hard. It's, you know, things like people make unwanted, terrible comments, like they feel it's okay. And this was like discussions about political stuff. We need more diverse staff than the students, or than the adults would know how we feel and what it's like. I've gotten better at handling unwanted comments from others. It's hard for us to imagine how hard it was for some of our parents. So anyways, and then like a student recalled like another student telling her that she should go back to her country at like post-election time. I mean, so, you know, the comments are being made. I just don't know how to do this in a manner that's productive and helpful, both for the community, the students, and the schools. So I don't know. Those are like, I'm kind of like spewing this out here, not really formulating my thoughts, but that's sort of the input or thoughts I have.
So let me just jump in quick here. So the thing is this, right? So my kids have dealt with a lot of things that have gone on. I know that there's the reporting system, but the problem is that everybody knows who reports and who doesn't report. And it's also not, you know, you do something, there is repercussions, right? From other students, they might, you know, cyberbully you, they might do something, whatever it may be. But I guess my thing is that this stuff's happening, and if we tread too lightly on it because we don't, of course we want to, you know, be mindful of how we put the information out. That's why I'm saying we put it anonymously. But I feel like the damage is already done. Like these students, and we're talking about high school. I also have intermediate and I also have elementary. This stuff's in elementary too. You know, some of the stuff that I hear from my own kid, you know, for younger kids, you know, it might not rise to that level, but they're already getting that information. So I guess I feel like this is where I don't like to tiptoe, because my thing is I want to hear, we have to bring it to the forefront. We have to talk about it. It might be uncomfortable. And I totally agree with, we don't want to put anybody in a situation, but they're already in a situation, right? Like the BSU, I mean, I think about that. I mean, and Izzy could probably talk about a lot of this stuff. My son is in it, my daughter's in that as well. And the thing is that the focus is already on them. So any decision that comes from that group, people are going to know where it came from, regardless. So I just feel like since we are, and especially since we have such a group, especially from teachers and administrators here, this is where people need to start hearing these things and then making the changes. Because when I hear that a teacher is not handling that situation, I have a problem with that. Because my thing is that that person is the leader in that class, right? You have taken over that parent role for me at that time period. And if my child is exposed to something and you choose not to do something about it because you don't know what to do, as a parent, I have a problem with that. So I'm just trying to say, let's have a conversation on how do we handle if something like that happens? What do we do? How do we dissolve the situation? Who do we report it to? How do we repair the harm for that kid who's already been targeted and affected by that conversation? So, you know, I feel like we shouldn't tiptoe on this. I think we should just, and again, this is going to help us as a group. We have to adhere as a group, and we have to be able to trust each other and have these conversations.
Like adding on to what he was saying, like, yeah, like I would definitely love to have, like, I would share all my experiences that I have, because it's just like I want something to be done. I'm tired, like, in my opinion, like I don't want to go back to school because I'm scared that I'm gonna get like even more harassed than more what I already have been getting, like since what's been happening with like everything. So I just like I want to have these conversations, and I'm like a teenager and a high school student, and as a mixed person, if you have any questions about that, I would like answer them, because I just want this to get solved. Like I want my niece to be happy because she's a mixed child too. I want her to be able to go to school and be comfortable with who she is as a person, as a human being. So yeah, just like another thing, if you have any questions, please feel free to answer. Even if like if they make you uncomfortable, even if they just please do it, and it'll make it so much easier for everybody. But that's what I have to say.
Hey, Isabella, just curious from your perspective, I think part of being heard, do you think that other people, other members of the Black Student Union would appreciate the opportunity to be heard and part of that thinking process as well?
I can definitely ask, but I feel most likely, I feel like any minority would definitely just feel down to just talk about everything that we've been through.
Okay, because I think it's time for us to hear student voices so that we can start putting action to make you feel supported. Thank you.
Yeah, I can definitely start talking to my club and my club advisor about that stuff.
And just one thing to add with that, it's not just Black students. I mean, there's white students who can tell you stories. So this is where we got to be careful, because if we have all these Black students come out and saying this, now it's a Black problem, right? Then it's not like and I understand what you're saying about getting their feedback, but I think this is where we kind of have to say, okay, we need everyone's feedback, because I think about transgender. Like, there's just so many people who are being affected by bigotry, racism. I'm not going to talk too much, but Stephanie, I saw your hand up. I think I cut you off before.
Oh, no, that's okay. I totally agree that people's voices need to be heard. I think my only thought with what Christy was saying was, that if a student confides in me and shares their story with me, I would just want to know that they are okay with me sharing their story, because it's not my story to share. So I think when she made the Google comment, or the Google form comment, that would be my only concern, is that I would hate to lose trust with a student who confided in me about something that they were struggling with. Not because it's not an important topic, but that I need to respect that relationship as well. Not that I wouldn't share the story, but I personally would feel obligated to that student to run it by them before I use it as an example. Because if it did get out to the community, and the student didn't want that story shared, that would be just as, maybe not just as traumatic, but that wouldn't necessarily be helpful for the student either. So I think for me personally, as a high school teacher, and I work with a smaller population of students, that would be something that I would need to do before I would just share a story of someone else's story. I would make sure that student would be okay with it, so that if it got out, they were comfortable with it. That was the only thing I was going to say.
And Joel, just to wrap around, thank you for making the point that it's not just students who are Black. For me, I think my point was, I want student voice to be heard. The BSU was the example that was given. And it feels Isabella is able to sort of articulate that here, but I'm not sure that other kiddos have that voice and that ability to do. You're 100% with multiple groups being able to speak out, and that option is valuable. Thank you for pointing that out.
Yeah, and I didn't take anything by it. I just, people have different personalities, especially kids, right? They might feel the same, but some kids are more vocal. Some kids don't even want to say anything, but they're still going through the same issues. So I just want to check. It's 7:30, Mike, so I don't want to go over.
Can I say one thing too? I mean, Joel, I think it's great too if we think, okay, we need to come up with a system and all that, but also there's still going to be the ongoing of how do we get kids, teens especially, how do we get them to change and not be mean? And, do they even know, do a lot of these students even know that this is really all going on? Maybe I'm being naive. Do they know that this type of bullying is going on? Do they know that people are saying these things to different groups of, people? And, I'm just like, when I'm hearing, Isabella talk, I'm envisioning like, oh man, if we were back in school, how cool it would be if we could just have this presentation, have some speaker come in, have, all these voices anonymously being heard on the screen of what's being said to the students at school to make it real to everybody of what's really going on. So
I think believe it or not, I think a lot of students know what goes on. They just kind of just keep moving because it's just like, obviously it doesn't affect them, or they don't want to say anything because they don't want to be the target. And honestly, the goal shouldn't be how do we make students not become mean, right? We don't even have to talk about racism, right? I mean, students are just mean, right? Kids are mean, adults are mean. I think that's more of, honestly, something that happens in the home, where we have to kind of figure out what do we need to do so our kids don't project those type of things. So yeah, it does bring up a great point what you were saying about some people might not know, but I think just based on what I hear, a lot of students know a lot of things. We just have to ask them. And maybe Isabella, maybe you could chime in with that, because obviously I'm not a student, but I have kids that know things way before I know them.
Yeah, like I know like a lot, but here's the like kids know stuff. It depends. It's like I'm not to like be like a teenager or whatever. Like if it's like drama related or like if it gets big, a lot of people know. But it's like if it's just like happening, like if I just get called the N word, a lot of people won't like do anything or like talk about it or anything because like it's normalized in the high school. Like it gets talked about, but like it's just normalized now. So like stuff gets heard throughout the high school, and a lot of kids do know what's been going on, but a lot of kids are like ignorant to the fact about what's actually happening.
So, do we want to do a motion for just coming up with a list, an anonymous list, where we just add things to it? Now, obviously, we shouldn't put names on it. Obviously, it should be more broad, but direct in the sense of if somebody says a word, you put the word there so we know what people are saying. But unless we put this stuff down, we're really not going to know. So what do you guys think about that going forward with just a list, an anonymous list, and just adding to it? Do I have a motion?
I agree with the idea, Joel. I just don't think we need a motion to do it. It's not an official action or anything like that. We can always just send out a list, same as we are with setting future meetings by sending out a Google poll or anything like that. So I agree with it. I just don't know if we need a motion. That's all.
Oh, okay. Well, that makes it easy then. Then let's do a list. So should we just ask Rebecca to set that up?
Sure, I think we can do that. Mike has had his hand up for a moment there. Go ahead, Mike.
So I just want to thank Isabella for sharing because it took a lot of courage to do that. So thank you, Isabella. From the list perspective, as a school administrator in a different district, I'm thinking, what do we want to do next with that too? So as Isabella has said, as Joel has said, with very little time, we can amass a significant list. And so then my mind goes to, are we feeling like we need to bolster the individual student response and support? And are we hoping then to provide like professional development for staff around what Isabella is saying, do something, and like something can look like this? Or, and I don't have exactly the answer, but if you can help me with the vision a little bit more, I might be able to help a little bit more in my thoughts as well.
So Mike, what I think about it is, first we identify it. Then after we identify it, then that's where we come up with the path that we're going to take. So if we're looking for teacher support in terms of when these scenarios happen, then we figure out how those teachers or how the group of teachers will get that support. If we're talking about students who don't feel comfortable about saying something, how do we shore up that process where that information could be relayed? So I guess I feel like we could do a lot of things at one time. I don't think we just have to pick one. Obviously, we should support students regardless. I think that's all the time. So if we know, if Isabella's talking about this stuff now, there should be people reaching out to her to see, okay, to support her regarding that. But I guess what I think about that is we can go in multiple directions. But I definitely think, I think about our staff, our teachers. I feel like what equipment are you giving them? How are they being equipped to deal with stuff like this? Melanie has her hand up, Mike. Sorry, I can't unmute.
Go ahead, Mel.
I actually think Gina has had her hand up a lot longer than I. So, Gina, did you have something other? And then I can talk.
Sure. No worries. It's good for me to hold my tongue once in a while. Good practice. I just wanted to say also thank you for your courage in bringing up your concerns, Isabella. I think that staff has been given a tool through Teaching Tolerance called Speak Up at School. And I'm wondering, Tim, if students at the high school have had any exposure to that. In my opinion, it's a great resource that really explains all the power that we have as an individual to make change. When we hear something that is biased language and we speak up every single time we hear it, then that creates awareness, it creates change. And I am distraught to hear that my colleagues have ignored such strongly biased language. And I know we need to do better. And so I'm wondering if that step that some of us have, I mean, we've all, I believe, as a district staff, been trained in that. And if that's something that we need to brush up on and remind one another that we have a responsibility to each other and to our students to speak up every single time we hear biased language used in our presence, or if we hear from a student that it happened outside of our presence, it needs to be addressed every single time. So Tim, do you know if that has been, or high school staff, do you know if that's something that has reached the students?
So I can speak super quickly to that,
Sure.
and then
Sorry, I
maybe
keep setting you
a high
up,
school
I feel like
person can add on, and I'll keep it super short. 2 years ago, we provided all staff on a school-by-school basis with about 90 minutes of training on teaching tolerances, speak up at school resource. We did the same for all of our new hires last year. We haven't cycled in our new hires this year yet. The only school that I know of that really did something comprehensive with their students was the intermediate school in the spring of 2019. They did school-wide activities. Some of their kids did a public service announcement. It was mailed home. It was emailed home to families. So I know the intermediate school did something. I believe at the high school, Mike Dreyer and Rose Nadler did some more targeted work with the Speak Up resources with a selected bunch of kids. But I don't think there has been a school-wide thing unless, you know, Christy or Monique, or let's see, who else do I have? Stephanie, if you know differently and can correct me. And Izzy and Sam, for that matter, as kids. So I'm Izzy and Sam, we're talking about Speak Up at School. Does this, and it's like 4 resources. It's interrupt, question. There are a few different strategies. Does this ring a bell with you, or is this kind of something you haven't heard before?
I haven't heard it before.
Okay. I haven't heard of anything either. I don't know if Audrey had. Audrey's the other student.
Audrey's also here, yeah.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry, Audrey.
Sorry, something was breaking out. Can you explain? I didn't hear the last part.
Yeah, we're just wondering, Audrey, the question is, teachers were trained on a set of strategies. Did it make it to the kids? It's called Speak Up at School. And it would be like a little card with 4 different strategies on it.
I've never had that. I've never been given that to by a teacher. I have felt that some teachers have been more supportive and of me speaking up in the past, while others kind of push stuff under the rug a little bit. And I think it depends on the teacher and how comfortable you are with that teacher and how well you know them as a person as well a little bit. But I've never heard that before, so.
I think that's our answer right there. I think for sure, intermediate school 2 years ago, yes. I don't think any place else, including at the high school where there's a really acute need. And obviously we need to do more repetition and rehearsal with all of our staff on this. And after the meeting, I'll find a way to get this resource out to the other committee members so you can see what we're referring to here.
I mean, I have to, yeah, thank you, students, because, you know, it's great to hear your voices, because again, you guys have a lot to offer, because we're doing this for you. right? So we need to know if we're going in the right direction or not. Tim, I definitely agree with, if you guys have that resource, that maybe you go over that again or bring it to the other grades so everybody's on the same page. You know, because I even go further than that. What happened if within a classroom a teacher doesn't do something and it's race related? What is the actions that are taken by administration? Is it one of those things that they're going to, like, education? Are they given a warning? You know, those type of things.
That's what I wanted to say, is that I feel like there needs to be some policies, some things. If this happens, this is what you do. And if you don't do this, then this is what happens. Otherwise, the culture is not going to change. And it's the kids that are getting hurt. It's breaking my heart listening. And I mean, she's like screaming for help. And this is what we're here for. We've got to do better.
So yeah, just from my perspective, I was one of the individuals that trained people on Speak Up. In those meetings, people have questions, and as a facilitator, you do your best to answer them. What I recall is that, and nothing against our instructional coaches, but they were pulled because of their facilitation skills and not necessarily that they're farther along on their equitable journeys. And so I heard from other facilitators that answering some of the questions from the audience was very difficult for them because of where they are in their own personal journeys. So that was a concern that I had. It was also in isolation and was a one-time thing. And we've had staff turnover and new staff. So clearly that needs to get brought up. And I think I saw some things in the chat from some other educators about this needs to be a more consistent thing and not just like we did it once and check kind of thing, and bringing it up more consistently at staff meetings and hopefully having that idea better ingrained in that long-term memory. So when the moment happens, you know exactly what to do. I remember we even handed out the little things that fit in your badges, and the amount of ones I found in the recycling bin was upsetting. I remember it's like, just stick it in your badge. So there are definitely some concerns about whether staff feels like that's a priority or a need. So I think there's some work to be done there. And then I just, prior to this meeting, was in a different equity meeting with the National Equity Project, and educators voiced about times that they brought concerns up to administrators, and they were told that their concerns were causing division within the staff or division within the group. So I have concerns about the follow through of some of our administrators when educators that are concerned are bringing those concerns to their attention.
I agree, it starts at the top. They are the ones that control the culture.
So, Mike, maybe what we should do is we'll just kind of keep this on the agenda so we can talk about this further. Just again, I just want to be cognizant of people's time because it's like 7:47. So why don't we, again, we're going to do the Google Doc, reach out. I could reach out to Rebecca, ask her if she can generate that, and then we just start putting the information on that as well. And then if anybody has, I guess we're going to do the equity tool as well. So that's going to be something that will just keep being, we'll just keep that on our agenda as well as an item that we discuss. Is everyone okay with that? Oh, Tim?
Totally okay with that, but before we have a motion to adjourn, Gina and I have a super quick ask for the group. And I don't know if this is the time, but before we wrap up, we have a little thing.
Sure, go ahead.
So as part of our work with Nehemiah, we are gathering a group of 15 individuals that Nehemiah staff are going to conduct needs assessment interviews with. And Gina and I are looking for 2 parents or responsible adults that are on this committee to volunteer to be contacted by Nehemiah for one of these needs assessment interviews.
I'll do it.
I know we've thinned out a little bit. Joel? Okay, super. Anyone else?
I mean, I would do it.
Okay, Joel and Melissa, we have two. Thank you both. And thank you, Mike and Joel, for letting us get that request in.
You can construe that as a future meeting of some sort. I think what we'll do is we'll send out the Google or the doodle poll or whatever we call it for setting a next meeting time. It's worked pretty well for previous meetings, if that works for everybody. So beyond that, there's nothing else on our agenda.
We have a December meeting set already?
Yeah, see, we did.
January?
Perfect. Thanks, Rebecca. So I'd entertain a motion to adjourn as seeing nothing else on the agenda for today.
Motion.
Second.
Nice, seconded by Sam. All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed, I'll leave the Zoom meeting open for you so you can stick around. All right, we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Happy holiday.
Bye-bye.